Welcome to the Horror Next Door. This is all the horror movies we watched in September 2023. I know we're a little late, but Friday the 13th took over. But here we are. Links to our Letterboxd accounts are in the description box below. If you like this video, would you kindly subscribe?
Night of the Demons from 1988. We have spoken about Night of the Demons on our What We Watched videos many times because I'm obsessed with it, so I watched it a lot. This specific viewing was on Shudder with Joe Bob. He and Darcy were at a drive-in event in Pennsylvania. That was an interesting event. Song and dance thing that was kind of weird, but it was cool that Amelia Kincaid and Linnea Quigley were there. There's nothing about this film that can be said that I haven't said a million times. I don't necessarily want to be like, oh, go look at one of our older videos or whatever, but if you have been watching us for a while, I don't need to repeat myself. This movie's amazing. I've been watching it since I was a kid. That might be why I am so passionate about it and just never get sick of it and talk it up so much. Sometimes things that we see when we're younger just stick with us in that way, but I think it's a great, entertaining, fun flick, perfect for Halloween. So if you haven't seen this, I again beg of you, please check it out. But if you don't like it, then I don't want to know.
So yes, we have talked about Night of the Demons plenty of times in the past. I'm sure you can go and find it here on the channel. So I'm going to keep this brief. We obviously had to watch this with Joe Bob. He's great. If you don't know anything about Joe Bob and you have Shudder, just go on Shudder and pull up Joe Bob. Find a movie that you've probably already seen and you know you like, and just check it out. See what he's all about. Learn all his random factoids he has. I think you'll like it. And if you do like it, then you can go check out some of the other movies that you probably haven't seen. But that being said, Night of the Demons is a classic. I'm actually kind of sad that I did not see this movie earlier in my life. Obviously, not seeing it until after meeting Hellcat. But I'm glad this movie is now in my life. And I agree with Hellcat that this is a must-watch every year during the month of October. So obviously I recommend this movie. Go check it out.
Natty Knocks from 2023, which was watched on Tubi. Well, I love Robert Englund and I love Bill Moseley. We all know that when Robert Englund is in a film of this caliber, he's probably in it for all of 5 minutes maximum. And I think that's about what we got. He was actually in it a bit more than I thought he was going to be. Bill Moseley plays the bad guy, so that was kind of cool and fun. Not a lot else was cool or fun about this movie, though. What the heck? This was like some soap opera level acting in here. There was some really weird dialogue. The way people said a lot of their dialogue was strange. I guess it's mostly the main two teenage kids that we focus on. There were just so many cliches in this. It's crazy. Considering it was released in 2023, you would think maybe people were trying to do something a little bit different by now. But no, it hits so many of the horror beats that we've been seeing for decades. I have seen worse horror movies. It's insane that I can say that, but I have. I don't think if I was as much of a horror fan as I am, I would have tolerated this movie for its whole runtime. I can't talk mad shit about this movie. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever seen. I didn't have the worst time. There were parts that were fun to make fun of, and I laughed at things that weren't supposed to be funny. So I could have had a worse time. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you go out and watch it, but it wasn't terribly long and it wasn't terribly painful to get through. So you choose if you've got nothing better to do, or maybe you're not going to pay full attention when this is on.
So obviously, seeing the poster for this, going into this with low expectations, but then finding out that Bill Moseley is in it and Danielle Harris is in it and Robert Englund is in it. And then the director was, Dwight H. Little, who directed Halloween 4. I feel like both of us were kind of like, maybe this will be kind of cool. But honestly, was a little disappointed by it. Danielle Harris is barely in the movie. Obviously, Robert Englund is barely in the movie. Bill Moseley, I think, has like no lines, or if he does have any lines, it's towards the end of the movie. I don't know. I just really couldn't get into this one. Wasn't a big fan. It's not the worst horror film we've ever seen, but pretty forgettable in my opinion. So I do not recommend it.
The Craft from 1996, which I watched on my DVD copy. I don't really know what even made me want to rewatch this. I just felt like it. I've seen it a lot of times over the course of my life. I know when it first came out, I was really, really obsessed with it. So it was a really big comfort watch. Lots of feelings of nostalgia from watching it again. It's been quite a while. It really is just a classic at this point. I'm not sure why I had it logged at 4 stars, but I bumped it up to a 5 on Letterboxd because this movie's great. I just really love it. I very highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. It's basically just about 4 teenage girls in high school that start playing with witchcraft. Just know whatever you put out comes back to you times 3. Check it out.
Ritual from 2013, which I watched on a rented Netflix disc. I thought this was a fun little indie horror film. It revolves around a cult of sorts, a satanic cult. There are a lot of members of this cult that wear this really cool skull mask. So there's a lot of imagery with these dudes wearing these skull masks, and they look pretty freaking awesome if you ask me. But other than the ritual stuff and the cult members wearing the cool masks and everything, a lot of this movie is a little bit forgettable. And honestly, I'm having a hard time recalling everything that happened in this movie. I just remember the really cool masks. So if you're into that sort of stuff, then I would recommend it for you, but otherwise I don't.
Alice, Sweet Alice from 1976, which I watched on a rented Netflix disc. Sad to say that because this is going to be the last month we'll be able to say that. I've wanted to see this movie for an extremely long time. The poster is so intriguing. It's got a creepy mask, it's got a knife, it's got blood, it's got a baby doll, variations thereof where you see the kid in the mask and the yellow raincoat. It's always an intriguing and creepy looking poster. I really enjoyed this movie. I'm glad that I finally watched it. It might be more subtle than some of the younger horror fans out there are used to, but I actually really enjoyed that. And there were some really disturbing parts. If you think about the fact that this is centering around children and some of the things that are occurring and the fact the child is a suspected murderess, that right there is pretty freaky. I liked the little twists and turns they put in here. I thought it was well done. I was never bored. I definitely recommend you check this film out if you haven't.
The Caller from 2011, which I watched on a rented Netflix disc. This is another one of those movies I just had on my Netflix queue for God knows how long, and I'm just now getting around to watching it. This movie actually really surprised me. I thought it was going to be another forgetful little B horror movie, but actually it was pretty fun. I think another reason why I really enjoyed this one, if you've listened to our videos in the past, you'll know that I'm really into just time manipulation type things. The premise in this movie is that this woman moves into a new apartment after separating from her husband, and there's a phone in there, an old phone that she finds that she just hooks up, but she starts receiving phone calls from a woman that claims to be calling her from the past. And it's really interesting because she starts doing things that change in the present, and it's really wild stuff. And then obviously you add in there a sinister element of sorts, and things really get pretty creepy and crazy. So I really liked all that stuff. I think this movie was pretty effective. I definitely would recommend this movie. It's not super gory or anything like that. It's not a like hardcore horror film, but it's definitely something that a casual fan would enjoy. I liked it, and I think I had a lot of fun with it.
Plot 36 from 2022, which I watched on Netflix. I basically just wanted to start checking out the Cabinet of Curiosities series, which is a collection of short films. I haven't watched one since then, so I don't know if that speaks volumes or not. But it's not that I didn't like this either. I did like it. I enjoyed when Tim Blake Nelson's character took the books that he found to that woman. She was fucking cool looking. I'm like, okay, can I look like her when I get older? And then she involved another fellow, and they were both sort of occult expert type people, I guess it was just supposed to be antiques. I think especially the guy that she called in was into occult stuff, and that was when it started getting interesting. And then of course the ending and everything that happened there was awesome. So overall, Karma's a bitch, and I loosely recommend this. It's not the greatest thing I've ever seen, but at a lean 47 minutes you could do worse.
Twixt from 2011, which I watched on a rented Netflix disc. I honestly don't even know why I rented this movie. I'm not sure why it was on my list. Again, this was on my list for a very long time. I think I always just thought the poster looked kind of cool. It wasn't until I actually rented it that I realized it was Elle Fanning, and it also had Val Kilmer in it. And then I realized that the director was Francis Ford Coppola. I'm like, what? So anyway, going into this, didn't know what to expect. It was definitely weird. And it definitely has a lot of weird imagery and a lot of weird shit going on. But I think overall, I just couldn't really get into it. It was just kind of down the middle average for me. I'm also just not a huge fan of Val Kilmer, so maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. But it had some fun parts, but I think overall it was just pretty average.
The Crow from 1994, which I watched on my own Blu-ray copy. I think I have VHS, 2 different kinds of DVDs, and a Blu-ray copy of this. It is one of my all-time favorite movies, so needless to say, I very highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. They did make sequels, which are all pretty bad. One has Edward Furlong in it, as The Crow. I love Edward Furlong, but I guess they're officially, supposedly, finally, after all these years, moving forward with making a remake, which breaks my heart, and there's no way I'm going to pay a dime to see it. I might watch it eventually out of morbid curiosity, if it ever gets made. I still kind of hope that it gets stricken down.
Bullshit. That's how I feel. Total fucking bullshit.
This isn't even almost necessarily a horror film, but the atmosphere and the subject matter was enough to constitute, we thought it would justify me mentioning it in this video. Brandon Lee is The Crow, period, point blank. There is no other. Look into everything if you don't know about the events that transpired during the making of this film, but independent of all that tragedy and sadness, this film is tragic and sad. It's also so well made, has such a specific tone and ambience to it that is so unforgettable, and with the soundtrack and literally just everything about it, it just like seeps into my soul. I like feel it in my chest just thinking about it. So finally rewatching it again, it's been a long time, a great experience. Please watch it if you haven't. It's really amazing.
Lake Placid 2 from 2007, which I watched on a rented Netflix disc. Yep, Lake Placid 2. So in my quest to finish as many things as I can from my Netflix queue, I was in the process of trying to finish all the Tremors films. And at the same time, I said, you know what? I haven't seen all these Lake Placid sequels. Maybe I should start renting them. So this was the first one I rented. Obviously, I've seen the original. I wouldn't necessarily call it a classic, but it's a memorable film for what it is. Plotline of Lake Placid 2 kind of plays out the same way the original Lake Placid does, only with a shoestring budget. That being said, I had a blast watching this movie. If you're new here, we love watching movies that are just so bad, it's just fun. There are some movies that are so bad, it's just bad, but every once in a while, you just have so much fun watching something, and I couldn't turn this off, and I couldn't fast forward through it or anything. I watched this from start to finish. I watched every second of it. It had ridiculous CGI, ridiculous, acting and reactions to stuff, but it was great. I had a blast with it. If you're into watching, so bad it's good type of flicks, I would definitely recommend this.
Dark Real from 2008, which I watched on a good old Netflix DVD. It's funny the films that I chose in the scramble to try to get through my queue the best that I could before Netflix wasn't sending discs anymore. I don't know why I thought I was going to be able to get through more than I did. I wasn't taking the mail time into account, I suppose, as much as I should have, but I prioritized an Edward Furlong film. Anyway, Lance Hendrickson, Alexander Holden are also in this. Oh, I guess Tony Todd's in it for like 2 seconds. I can't even remember what character he played, to be honest. But anyway, those names were another reason I was like, okay, cool. I don't see this streaming. Let me just go ahead and get this disc so I can see it. It's a below average film. It got super repetitive. I think that it had a lot of unique elements to it, considering it's from 2008 and a lot of horror films from the 2000s all just copied each other and had all the exact same beats. But it just got really repetitive, and I was losing interest. I remember leaving the room a couple of times. But at the same time, I was interested enough to rewind it and pick up on certain things that I missed. So that says enough. I extremely loosely recommend this. It had some cool parts to it. It also had some really generic cliche and poorly acted in a hilarious way parts. So I'll leave that at your discretion.
Tremors 4, The Legend Begins, from 2004, which I watched on a rented Netflix disc. So I've actually seen Tremors 4 before, but just wanted to rewatch it again before I went into unknown territory with the Tremors series for me. This is the prequel film that's like a Western, takes place in the same town from the original Tremors, only it's now the 1800s and everybody's Western, you know, they got their cowboy hats on and trench coats and stuff, and they got their revolvers and things. Obviously, Michael Gross is still in this movie, but he plays a ancestor of the character he usually plays. The premise of this movie is this is a mining town, and there's guys down in the mine, and they start getting attacked by the graboids. They shut down the mine, and the town pretty much dries up. Everybody starts leaving. Michael Gross's character owns the mine. He comes to town trying to figure out why they shut down the mine, and now they have to deal with the graboid problem. So you can picture how that's going to go in your head. So even though this is a Western film and it's a prequel and everything, I still kind of actually enjoyed it, to be honest with you. It's much longer than the previous Tremors movies up to this one. For it being a Western movie and everything and a prequel, it's kind of like, why is this so long? But it's fun. I had fun with it. I would recommend it. So before we move on, I just want to say that up until this point in the month, I thought that I was going to be able to rent all the Tremors movies, and I was going to be able to rent all the Lake Placid movies from Netflix and be able to get through them all before Netflix shut down on September 29th. However, it wasn't going to happen. I just knew it wasn't going to happen. So I said, you know, they have to have some kind of Tremors DVD pack or something on Amazon that I could just buy that's not super expensive. So I went and did that. And in the process, I said, well, what about Lake Placid? Do they have anything? I found this 4-pack that comes with 4 of the Lake Placids. It was still missing the first 2. So I was like, me being a completionist, I said, well, now I got to get the first 2. So then I found this other pack that not only came with those same 4 Lake Placid movies, but now it came with 4 Anaconda films. And then I just bought Lake Placid 1 and 2 separately. So now I have all the Tremors on DVD. I have all the Lake Placids on DVD and also all the Anacondas on DVD. So I'm going to begin the quest of watching all of these. Be sure to be subscribed to hear all about it.
247 degrees Fahrenheit from 2011. I almost don't want to tell you where I watched this because I don't want anyone else to watch it, but I watched it on Tubi. I gave this half a star on Letterboxd, and that says everything because I very, very, very rarely give a half a star. But this was legitimately one of the stupidest movies I've ever seen in my life. I left a lengthy and snarky review on my Letterboxd about it, so I won't go too far into detail. This was something I just put on randomly because I had other things to be doing, and I knew I wasn't going to be paying attention to the TV screen. I was really hoping for a crappy horror movie pack type of movie. That's definitely what I got, but not one of the kind of good ones. This is not so bad it's good. It's just bad, bad, bad all around. Writing, acting, editing, there's nothing right about this movie. I could not recommend it less. So if the plot of people being trapped in a sauna is intriguing to you, don't be. This should have been a short film at best.
The Hole from 2009, which I watched on a rented Netflix disc. So there is another movie called The Hole, which is from 2001, which stars Thora Birch and Keira Knightley. That is not this movie. I have seen that movie, and I don't really remember much about it because it was a long time ago. But this is The Hole from 2009 that's directed by Joe Dante. I feel like the best way I could describe this movie is if Nickelodeon or CW or one of those type of channels made a hardcore as they could get PG-13 horror film. So I'm not saying that as a diss. I'm just saying that's the best way I can describe it. The movie isn't terrible. I saw somebody on Letterboxd say that this was like a kiddie horror movie, and I completely agree. It is like a kiddie horror movie. I feel like I really enjoyed the setup to the movie and just them finding the hatch in the basement that opens to this mysterious hole that just goes nowhere. It's like a black hole. I liked all of that, but then I just didn't really like where the movie went with it. And I'm not going to give anything away, but when you watch it, or if you watch it, you'll know what I mean. I feel like they could have taken this in a real dark and twisted way and made it a hardcore R-rated film, but then they took it a more tamer way and made it PG-13. And I think that's probably why I didn't like it. The setup was great, but just everything after that wasn't into it. So I don't recommend it.
The Red Shoes from 2005, which I watched on a rented Netflix disc. I did kind of prioritize quite a few foreign language films and Asian horror films in my last couple of months of being able to rent discs from Netflix because I really enjoy those types of films the majority of the time. And again, if I couldn't find them on a streaming platform that I have without paying for them, I was like, well, why not get them from Netflix while I can? Considering the fact that it's literally about a pair of shoes that curse people and make them act weird and everything, it was really quite good. I believe perhaps the title comes from the idea of blood being on the shoes because they're not really red, they're actually pink. But I don't know. It's something silly. And a lot of people talk about it if you look at Letterboxd reviews. So it's not like I'm making an original joke there. I was just making an observation. Anyway, there were some really cool things about this. There was this part where it was snowing and the snow started being bloody. And I was sort of like, this is so cool. And how did they do this? It was just like landing on the woman's face and it turned bloody. And I thought, I don't know if that's CGI or not, but it was really cool. And if it was CGI, I couldn't tell. It's not the most original Asian horror flick I've ever seen. I'm having a hard time remembering what else I thought specifically was cool about it. One of the things that will keep you engaged if you watch this film is that there's a little girl in here that's kind of pulling a Chucky doll sometimes. You know, the scene where the mom in Child's Play is about to throw Chucky in the fire and he starts freaking out. Like, that little girl does that, and she wilds out. But there's also situations of child endangerment. So I wouldn't recommend this movie to anyone that's sensitive to that. I just think that it's one of the engaging and suspenseful aspects of the film. I was not bored when watching this. I would recommend it.
Fallen from 1998, which I watched on a rented Netflix disc. So going into this, I really had high expectations. You know, I've heard about this movie for a long time now, and everybody's always told me it was a good movie. It's got Denzel Washington in it. It's got John Goodman. It's got Donald Sutherland, you know, 3 actors I like, you know, and it's about, you know, a serial killer and weird shit going on. I really was like, okay, I'm going to like this movie. I need to finally watch it because Netflix is going away. So now I'm finally watching it. And I'm not going to lie to you. I started falling asleep halfway through this movie. I was bored with it. It was really boring. I'm sorry. Did not have fun with this. I feel like the opening act was good. After that, it really slowed way down and I just didn't care for it. I know Fallen is more of a thriller than a horror film, but even as a thriller, it was not thrilling me. I don't know. I feel like there was some cool scenes and a nice little kind of twist ending, so to speak, but really slow in the middle. So for that, I don't recommend it.
Proxy from 2013, which I watched on Tubi. I believe that I prioritized this because Tubi said it was going to be expiring soon, so if it's not there anymore, that is why. This movie was severely messed up. I can't really go into any details without spoiling things. I think it was already on my radar before I saw Jay mention it on Red Letter Media's YouTube channel. It's hard for me to even say whether I like this or not. I just feel like if you've seen this movie, you would understand why. I am not even willing to say whether or not I would recommend it. There is just way too much touchy subject matter in here. I'm just going to put it this way. It involves extremely young children, infants even, and it's quite aggressive. Something that happens in the very beginning of the movie is so, I don't know. I think I'm scarred. I like watching disturbing movies, and I think that's probably how this originally got on my radar. I'm not saying it was a poorly made film. I'm not saying it was good or bad. I'm just saying I don't know how I feel about this, and I don't know if you should watch it or not. I guess if you like disturbing movies, check it out. This is definitely disturbing, and that's all I have to say about that.
The Voices from 2014, which I watched on a rented Netflix disc. So this is a horror comedy about a man who's played by Ryan Reynolds, who is a psychopath, I guess is the best way to describe him. He talks to his dog and his cat, which we all do, but they talk back to him, trying not to spoil much, but he starts liking a girl at work, tries to take her out on a date, some things happen, it just spirals from there. I feel like this is one of those movies where unfortunate things keep happening, and then you get to see the reaction to those unfortunate events and how it progresses the story and everything. I had a lot of fun with this. I love the humor. I love dark comedies. Without giving too much away, I really did like the part with Ryan Reynolds and the girl in the woods after they crashed the pickup truck. Just how that whole scene played out. But yeah, I would really recommend this movie. It was really messed up at parts. It had some dark humor at other parts. And I think that's just right up my alley. The other thing I will say real quick before we move on is I was actually really shocked that Ryan Reynolds actually does the voice of the dog and the cat. They don't sound like Ryan Reynolds at all. I guess I never knew that Ryan Reynolds could do voices like that. So congrats to him. I really thought they hired 2 actors to do the voices. I never in a million years would have thought it was him. But recommend this one. Check it out.
The Thing from 1982, which I watched on my Blu-ray. After watching Black Mountain Side, which was discussed in our last What We Watched video, I just really wanted to see this again. I love this movie. I've watched it a bunch of times, but I had not seen this in a long time either. So I guess I was doing a lot of nostalgic comfort watching type things this month. This movie's perfect. What can I say? I'm clueless about how it was panned and hated so much when it first came out. I love it to no end. If you have not seen this movie, you must watch it. It is so good. And I know that there is a film before this, and this is technically a remake, and I know they made supplemental films to this that are more recent, but nothing can touch this in my opinion. Could not recommend it more. Face from 2004, which was the last Netflix disc that I will ever rent. Sorry. First of all, I'm so sad we don't have Netflix discs anymore. But second of all, I'm kind of sad this was the last one I got. At least if it had been the Red Shoes one, I would have been like, okay. This one was pretty disappointing. The subject matter was that there's a guy that reconstructs human faces in detective work and things like that. And he's reconstructing a face, and it's complicated and it's taking a long time, and it somehow ends up affecting his daughter. I mean, they do explain everything. I just felt it was a little bit convoluted. I don't know. It's very middle of the road. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. So I would loosely recommend it, but definitely don't prioritize it. The plot was original, but I also saw the twist coming.
The Den from 2013, which I watched on a rented Netflix disc. So if you're not familiar with The Den, this movie is very similar to films like Unfriended or the movie Host on Shudder. The way the movie's kind of set up, you're watching the movie through the main character's computer screen. So if you don't like those kind of movies, probably shouldn't watch this one. But if you do like those kind of movies, I thought this was actually pretty good. So this movie has to do with the main character stumbling upon things that would be considered the dark web. So if you remember correctly, Unfriended came out in 2014, and then they made a sequel called Unfriended Dark Web, which came out in 2018. I liked both of those movies for what they were. I mean, they were cheesy at parts, but I liked Dark Web because I'm just been fascinated about the dark web or the deep web or whatever you want to call it. But this movie predates both of them from 2013. And I feel like whoever made Unfriended Dark Web had to have been influenced by The Den. If they weren't influenced by The Den, then it is such a coincidence because they're very similar. But I think The Den is just a little more hardcore. So that being said, I mean, some of the shots in this movie, because they're filmed to look real, actually do look pretty convincingly real. So I'm not sure how they pulled some of this stuff off, and with the special effects and everything, great job. because everything looked great. And that just reminds me, the way that this movie ends, I'm not going to spoil anything, but the way that the movie ends, there's like a reveal right before it cuts to the credits. Just exact shot for shot, the way that that is filmed. It's exactly how Unfriended Dark Web ends, if I'm not mistaken. Either it's a huge coincidence or they completely ripped off this movie. You know, this movie, The Den, is a very probably low budget, you know, under the radar kind of movie. And then Unfriended is a big, you know, theater release. So just looking at the details here, The Den is just made by two film companies I've never heard before, Onset Films and Cliffbrook Films. I'm pretty sure this was probably just released straight to video or something. It did not have a theatrical release. And then you go to something like Unfriended, which is a Blumhouse release. And the second one also lists Universal Pictures, which I'm assuming the first one was probably released by Universal as well. Just the production was done by Blumhouse and they were released in the theater. It wouldn't be the first time that a major theatrical released film stole elements and ideas from a underground, low budget B horror film that went straight to video. It's sad, really. I'm here to tell you, go check out The Den, especially if you like Unfriended. But even if you didn't like Unfriended, then check out The Den anyway, because you might actually like The Den more than you gave a shit about Unfriended. So I recommend it. Go check it out.
Saw X from 2023. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I love the Saw franchise. I know people love to hate on the majority of the sequels, especially some of the later ones, but aside from Spiral, which I don't even really consider a part of the thing for me, I just felt so disconnected and off and I didn't like it that I'm just pretending it's not there. But aside from that, I don't have any major complaints about any of these movies. The thing that I think I loved and I took away from Saw X is that it felt like a Saw film. Not only do you have Tobin Bell and Shawnee Smith back, but you get fun little surprises throughout, and it was just really extremely brutal and gnarly. Because this is still towards the beginning of Jigsaw's journey, it made sense that things were set up the way they were when he was doing the games in this movie. We see him go through so many different phases. He's upset because he knows he's sick, then he has all of this hope, and then he's so happy because he thinks that he's been helped and he's going to be able to live out the rest of his life without cancer. And then when he sees the truth and he gets angry and wants revenge, it was just so impressive to see this range from a character that at some points had just been reduced to a voice. If you do love this series and you do love Tobin's character and everything, I don't know how you really couldn't appreciate that aspect of this. And then we also have insanely gory Trap, but just felt so visceral and gritty. I think it was really great and I definitely recommend it.
So right off the bat, I'm just going to say flat out that I recommend this movie. But now I'm just going to dump all my thoughts about this movie. The one thing I do have to applaud the filmmakers for is I'm so glad that they kept the name Saw X. I was so afraid they were going to change the name to something like Saw Resurrection or Saw The Traps Are Back, like just some stupid title like that. But anyway, I'm so glad they kept the name Saw X. It's also nice to finally see the name Saw back after they had to name the 8th one Jigsaw for whatever reason. I don't know why it's not just called Saw 8. And then obviously part 9, Spiral, which Spiral doesn't exist to me. I'm sorry. I don't like it. I've compared it to Metallica's Saint Anger. I just pretend like it doesn't exist. For me, honestly, it's 1 through 7, Jigsaw, and then Saw X. I am even a fan of physical media, and I do not plan on ever buying Spiral on Blu-ray. The only way I would ever get Spiral on Blu-ray is if I bought some kind of collection pack thing and it just came with it. I really enjoyed this movie. I really liked the idea of it taking place between Saw 1 and Saw 2. I thought it would have been really cool if the movie ended with sort of like the beginning of Saw 2. I really thought it'd be cool if John Kramer just kind of walks over and sits down at the table right as SWAT teams breaking through to come arrest him in the beginning of Saw 2. I thought that would be such a cool way to end the movie, to have it really tie in with the second one. But This movie doesn't do that. And I'm not spoiling anything by saying this, but I feel like the way that the movie ends, it's really kind of open-ended in a way, because they could do another Saw movie and have it take place after Saw X, but before the events of Saw 2. So maybe they did that on purpose. They've already talked about if this movie does well, they are going to make another one. And honestly, bring it on. Make 20 more of these as far as I'm concerned. As long as Tobin Bell is alive and willing to make a Saw film, I think they need to bust one out every single year. Let's do it. But I will also say they need to bring back Carrie Elways, in my opinion. Dr. Gordon, let's do it. Maybe make a movie that flashes back and forth between, the events before Saw 2 and then events that are taking place in post Saw 7 or something. I don't know. Figure something out. It was really nice seeing Shawnee Smith back. Haven't seen her in a very long time. I think Saw 6 was the last one she was in. If you're listening to this and you haven't seen Saw X, all I will say is there is a mid-credit scene. So when you do finally check it out, stay through the credits. There's a cool little scene in there. So after giving all the praise that I just gave it, and I do think it's a great movie, I don't think it's the best Saw ever made. A lot of people are saying it's the best one, and I don't agree. It's not the best one. For me personally, Saw 2 and Saw 3 are the best Saw movies. I love them all, though. Don't get me wrong. I love every single one of them, except Spiral, obviously. But with that being said, I only really have 2 complaints. My first complaint is the opening of the movie and everything leading up to John finding out that the medical procedure that he's had done was all a big sham. I kind of felt like it went on for too long, because the trailer reveals all of that he goes for this medical procedure and they are scamming him. So we know going into the movie that this is all a big scam. But I feel like it just goes on for such a long time. It's like a good chunk of the movie. It's like 30 minutes or something like that, maybe longer. I don't know. But I kind of felt like, can we get to the Saul stuff? Because we know this is all a bunch of bullshit. Maybe it's just me. Maybe when I finally buy this on Blu-ray and I watch it a second time, it won't be as bad. But that's how I felt watching it in the theater. My second complaint, which I feel like is much bigger than the first complaint, is I really feel like the twists at the end weren't as impactful as previous films. Before I continue, I just want to point out that the 2 writers that wrote Saw X are the same 2 writers that wrote Jigsaw and Spiral. Now, that being said, I think the twist at the end of Jigsaw and the twist at the end of Spiral, and now the twist at the end of X, are the weakest twists in the entire series. The twists at the end of the original 3 that were written by Lee Winnell, fantastic. And then Saws 4 through 7 were written by the team behind The Collector, and those twists were still great. The way they ended and the way that they revealed things. The twist at the end of Jigsaw, Spiral, and Saw X, I really feel like they don't hit like the other movies do. When you first see the other Saw movies, it's like, holy shit. But honestly, with Jigsaw, Spiral, and now Saw X, it doesn't hit like that. You're not like blown away. I remember seeing Saw 2 and being like, holy shit, the way it ends, but not with this one. I was really hoping they would finally get their act together and really blow me away with a twist on this one. And I just really wasn't blown away with this one. I'm sorry. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the writers, but if they have to get new writers for the next one, then they have to maybe bring back the Collector guys. I'm not sure what they've been up to, but maybe bring them back. I just feel like if they are going to make a Saw 11, we need an impactful twist, especially if they are going to set it between the events of Saw X and Saw 2. I think the idea that I came up with having it tie into the opening of Saw 2 would be really cool, especially if you brought back Donnie Wahlberg and Lyric Bent and Dina Meyer and had them all show up at the end of the movie because it all tied in the Saw 2. I really think it would blow a lot of people away, like, holy shit, you know? And then everything kind of comes full circle. So if you watched Saw 11, you could just go right into Saw 2 and put Saw 2 on and everything would make sense. But I digress. I'm going to stop now. I've been rambling for too long about Saw X. Long story short, I recommend the movie. Go check it out.
As always, we thank you so much for watching. Leave us a comment if you have any horror movie recommendations, and we will add them to our watch list. Until next time.